to our podcast, Dr Diaries Adventures to Ireland. I'm your host, Graham. The aim of this podcast is to showcase doctors' relocation journeys to Ireland. So whether you're a doctor interested in the move or just curious about life in Ireland, this is the podcast for you. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome to our latest episode of Dr Diaries Adventures to Ireland. Today we have Eve on the call with us. Eve, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell us about you and your journey. Where did this all begin? Whereabouts from the UK are you originally from?
I'm originally from near Liverpool and Manchester, although you probably wouldn't get that from my accent.
No, not at all.
After I finished medical school, I moved to Newcastle upon Tyne in the northeast. Again, you wouldn't get that from my accent. And I've lived there for the last 10 years. So I did all of my training as a foundation doctor and a core trainee and a higher trainee, all up in the northeast. And I worked there as a consultant for a year. And then I moved to Ireland.
Amazing. And where in the country are we calling home now?
So I currently live in a kind of rural suburb of Dublin, I suppose you'd describe it as. It's absolutely gorgeous. I live about 100 metres from the beach. There's a colony of seals that eat me in the mornings, and there's sort of lovely sort of walks, and I'm only about a sort of 20-minute train journey outside of Dublin. So my friends have been visiting me probably more often than they have in the past, because everyone's very keen to come and crack is here.
Amazing. And you've already adopted some of the Irish language, I hear. And how funny that is. You have to move away from home to reconnect with friends again. Isn't it just strange how those things happen? So you're giving people a reason to visit Ireland and to visit you and get to find out why, as you say, what the crack is and why the heck you moved over here in the first place. You're currently a consultant psychiatrist in Nua Healthcare. Can you give us a bit of a sort of roundup of what you do there and the team that's involved there with you in Nua Healthcare?
Yeah, so in the UK, I trained as a forensic psychiatrist. So I've got that kind of added kind of sort of special interest in kind of risk and working with people in the criminal justice system. And I was contacted by Match Medics after I met one of your colleagues at I think it was the Royal College sort of Congress, the Royal College of Psychiatrists Congress. So you had a nice stall. There was an opportunity to get a free bottle of whiskey, which I didn't win. But I signed up, and I got contacted about Nua opening the first custom-built low secure psychiatric unit, which kind of piqued my interest. So obviously the way forensic psychiatric care is structured in Ireland at the moment, it's all levels of security are on one site in the central mental hospital, and that's the way it's been in perpetuity. And I think probably because the UK's got an awful lot more people than Ireland, and evidently an awful lot more calls, it's driven an expansion of forensic psychiatric services in the UK, which hasn't really translated in Ireland. But things are kind of picking up now. I think there's a lot more funding available, and there's a sort of recognition that some of the guys in prison have really poor mental health, and that needs to be kind of managed effectively. Nua were tempted into establishing this first low secure unit, and I thought it would be quite good fun to come over and sort of learn how to set up a service and develop a service. And it seemed like quite an exciting opportunity to get involved in the kind of nascent stages of what's kind of happened in the country that I grew up in.
And all that knowledge you're bringing across from the UK to set up a similar service here. So talk us through what a typical day looks like for you, as much as you can share, of course.
At the moment, I'm still, the hospital hasn't quite opened yet, so I'm still doing a lot of the induction. I'm helping to train some of the kind of nurses and healthcare assistants and things like that. They're going to be working there. In the meantime, I'm being kept busy with a community psychiatric service, which is focused mainly on learning disabilities and autism. I'm managing sort of a caseload of about 60 men and women who all live in sort of various levels of supported accommodation. Some of them have forensic risks, some of them don't, and I'm there to kind of help them out with any difficulties that they have with respect to their mental health and advancing their kind of independence and creating those plans to make sure they've got a decent quality of life.
Okay, so a slight deviation away from your background specialist area in forensics, and as you say, a stopgap in between now and when the official service is up and running. How have you found that shift?
It's been different. Most of my work in the UK was all in inpatient services and prisons and things like that. So it has been a big change,
Okay.
but the team that I'm working with are really enthusiastic and supportive and friendly. So I am enjoying it, and it's a good thing to kind of expand your repertoire and to sort of refresh all those sort of experiences that you had as a core trainee and things like that, working with intellectual disability.
Sure, yeah, bringing back all that knowledge from times past. Okay, and I guess what have you found is so far been the biggest difference between the UK and the Irish system? As you rightly established, we're light years away, aren't we, in terms of how developed our system is in comparison to the UK? But what, as a practitioner, what have you found has been the biggest difference?
Well, I think it's like the availability and the diversity of services. So I recently transferred one of my patients into hospital. He'd had a deterioration in his mental state, and the process of getting somebody admitted from the community into hospital is quite different from the UK. And
Okay,
certainly in the UK, I would have been using things like crisis teams and things along those lines before I thought about hospital admission. But those kind of services aren't available here. So there's a difference in the kind of range of options that you have. But having said that, everybody that I've worked with has been really proactive and helpful and compassionate. And so I think the differences that there are relatively small from a clinical point of view, although systemically they are noticed.
okay. And in terms of patients, what differences have you found between British and Irish patients?
I don't think from a clinical point of view there's a massive difference. I think sometimes there can be a bit of a cultural difference in sort of people's kind of attitudes to their mental health. I think there's been a lot more
Okay.
kind of promoting of the reducing stigmas around mental health in the UK. I think people are quite open to talking about mental health problems. And I think that's getting there in Ireland, but I think people are a lot more, to use a British phrase, a stiff upper lip. They tend to tell you that things
Okay.
are and perhaps they're not so all right, and it takes a little bit more digging maybe to really understand what their problems are.
Sure. So you're saying the Irish have a stiffer upper lip than the Brits do.
I think they do, yeah, definitely.
Very good, very good. And in terms of a timeline, until this new service is up and running, do you have visibility on what that service will look like in terms of what you're used to, in terms of its size and scale?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be slightly larger than the low scale units I've worked in the UK. So I think it's going to be about 50 or 60 beds, and so that's a
Okay.
pretty large hospital. It'll be spread over two wards and some step down units. And the medical director, who's sort of obviously the head honcho in opening up this new unit, she's from the UK as well, so she's a very experienced forensic psychiatrist in
Okay.
herself, and she's extremely helpful in sort of guiding me and helping me as well, helping me to settle in because she's been working in Ireland for the last few years. So she's been really, really kind and supportive in helping me to adjust to the life over here.
Very good. Okay. Anything else I think that's perhaps been surprising for you in a work sense since moving here?
I think actually I've been surprised at how similar things are. I think people's attitudes, the attitudes of the professionals who are involved, are really, really similar. And certainly, what I've really enjoyed with Nua is it's like one of my colleagues would call it like the UN. It's there's so
Oh,
many different people from different nationalities working with this,
sure.
people from South Africa and the UK and Portugal and all these different types of areas. So not just Europe, but kind of internationally. Um, So I think that makes for a really lovely MDT where you've got people bringing kind of different perspectives and different outlooks on things. So I've learned a lot from my colleagues, even in the short months that I've been working in Ireland. So I'm really enjoying it.
And would you have found that same cultural mix in previous jobs in the UK, or not as much?
I think there was certainly a cultural mix, but it was mainly Europe and places, so
Okay.
maybe like Europe and India and Pakistan and places like that. And I've got all of those types of people, plus sort of people from South Africa and Portugal and things like that, which I haven't had previously. So I think it's
Yeah.
a little bit broader, if I'm honest. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, and always good to have more minds at the table, more different perspectives and different views on what services are best, depending on the patient's needs. And work aside, then our two countries are very close to each other, but it would be ignorant of us to say that there aren't differences between us. What sort of cultural differences have you found outside of work that you've been, sort of struck by, that despite being 40 minutes away on a Ryanair flight, we are quite different creatures to Brits?
Yeah, I think, well, I suppose I'm a little bit more used to the sort of Irish culture and things like that because my grandfather was from Dublin, and
Okay.
my dad went to university in Dublin and then was very much one of those British guys who was like, I'm a little bit Irish. So we used to come to Ireland on all of our holidays and things. I spent most of my summer holidays in West Cork and things like that. So I was quite well adjusted to kind of the Irish way of things. But I think it's mainly around kind of being quite friendly. I think in general, although I do come from an extremely friendly place in the UK, I'm going to say the northeast of the UK is one of the loveliest places that I've lived, and I do miss it in many ways. But the like all the people that I've met on like dog walks and things like that have all been fantastically friendly. My husband's a big rugby player, so obviously the first thing he did was get down to
Okay.
the rugby, and everyone down there has been extremely friendly and sort of encouraging and been really sort of made us feel really welcome. Yeah, it's been really nice to meet everyone and to get to know kind of the local community, and for them to be so pleased that we kind of want to get stuck in and kind of make a life for ourselves here.
And what jersey would we be wearing on a match day if it were to be Ireland versus England? Is that too obvious a question to ask, Eve?
Well, I think I'd wear a Welsh one just to be diplomatic.
Very good. I think that's a wise choice. And I think you'll have more supporters there than you will enemies if that was the jersey you would decide to wear. Amazing. Great. And like that is, it's no big or no mean feat moving, wherever you happen to be coming from, and I guess tapping into that local community, whether it's British expats or whether it's just the existing community that you're moving into. It's a big thing. You have to, outside of work, that has to, work for yourself too. And as you mentioned, your partner as well. It's not just, you're not just relocating for your job, you're relocating your life too, and your hobbies and your interests outside need to be satisfied as well.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, we've really enjoyed sort of moving here. The work life balance is really excellent. So that's something I was wanting to strike a better balance in comparison to my work in the UK, because I think things can be a little
Okay.
bit more rushed there. And I think
Yeah.
so kind of having a little bit of a more laid back attitude, which I think the Irish are a little better at having a laid back attitude than the British can be.
Okay.
So I think that's been really helpful. Here, there's been fantastic opportunities for like water sports and all that sort of stuff. So you go out on the paddle boards, and we go kind of open water swimming in Dublin Bay
Very
and
good.
the rugby and things. And we were invited to the county final for the hurling the other day. So I got to go and see my first live hurling match, which was
Okay. Give us your review as a total outsider. What did you make of it?
it was terrifying. There was absolutely no self preservation. These lads were just tackling each other with big sticks, but it was great to
Yeah.
watch. And the
Yeah.
bar
It is
afterwards
definitely one of
said,
the
"Oh,
better spectator sports, isn't it?
it's fantastic. It's so fast. Often you can't really see where the ball is. You just kind of see men going manic at each other, and you're like, well, it must be somewhere over there." It's really, really good, really enthusiastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was there sort of shouting up the bends at the side of the pitch and in the bar
Okay.
afterwards.
Yeah, then as you say, yeah, the fun spills out into the post-match celebrations after. Very good, amazing, and also I can admit to being another one of those sea swimming nuts too. Even Irish find us bizarre, but there is pockets of us around the country now that I think. Speaking of mental health, I think that has, I think, with COVID here in Ireland anyway, and no doubt in places across the UK, sea swimming did pick up numbers because that was one of the big outlets, one of the things that we were allowed to do. And those who have kept it up, myself included, can certainly see the health benefits from getting into the cold Irish Sea. So glad to hear we've another adopted mad sea swimmer.
Yeah, so to be fair, the Dublin Bay is an awful lot warmer than the North Sea, so it's all right for us.
Hey, you're happy to brave the slightly warmer temperatures of the Irish Sea. Amazing. So, yeah, speaking of Irish culture, we're going to jump into our quick fire round, and that is just to test how far have you gotten into the Irish community. And I'll jump in with our first one. That is, so far in your travels here, where have you found is your favorite place in Ireland to visit?
Well, I think so. I said I'd spent a lot of time in West Cork, so I think probably there's a tiny village down there called Rosscarbery that I remember so fondly. It's got
Yes.
a gorgeous beach and a lovely little town and beautiful sort of like pubs and a wonderful seafood restaurant, which I hope is still open. So I would say that that's probably my favourite place, but I'm really looking forward to going on the Wild Atlantic Way, I think it's called. So along
Yes.
the
Yeah.
coast,
Yeah.
me and my husband got a VW camper van. It's like a 1973
Oh,
like.
amazing. Okay.
So we got that when we moved over, and we're looking forward to taking it out into the sort of the Irish countryside and enjoying a bit of time with us and the dogs in the middle of nowhere. So I maybe get back,
Incredible.
and I'm sure I'll be able to update it.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, remind yourself of your childhood down in West Cork. Unreal, and making us all envious now of your VW camper van travels. So you'll have to keep us updated on that. Jumping into the next one, favorite Irish celebrity. Who have you found a graw for since you've moved?
Well, I suppose so. I think historically it would definitely have to be Brian O'Driscoll because I was totally in love with him when I was a teenager. But
Okay.
recently there's that, and I'm not a big one for social media, but I keep getting shown videos of this guy called Garon who is delicious, and he does these
Yes, yes.
wonderfully funny videos on social media, and I'm gonna say I do love that guy, so I'll probably go for him as my favourite.
He's a great one to pick, and I admit to, the algorithm has caught me as well, and his Irish snack reviews are top of my list too. So he's very comical, whether he's trying or not, and probably hits every Irish stereotype he can along the way. So he's a good talisman for our social media influencing community. Next up, favorite Irish slang or phrase that either you recall from your childhood holidays here or you've picked up since moving?
Oh, well, I suppose, I mean, I used the crack before, but I think that's quite common in Newcastle. Like everyone talks about having the crack.
Okay.
So I don't know if the Irish have
Yeah.
infiltrated the pocket of the UK up there, but that's certainly
Yeah.
the most frequently used Irish word that I'd come up with. I think though
Okay.
one thing I noticed that did make me sort of double take was people saying like do be before a verb. So like I do be doing something. And I think
Okay.
I've never heard of that turn of phrase before, so that's probably the newest one that I've heard of.
Yeah. And I can't admit to being from Dublin, I can't admit to hearing myself or recalling myself saying that too often. But have you found yourself or caught yourself saying that? Have you fallen
Uh,
into the doobie
no,
trap?
but I have started saying that I'm after stuff. I think that's something I've started picking up. That
Okay.
I'm after
Yeah.
doing this or something like that.
Yeah, and that definitely confuses a lot of our South African incumbents. I'm after doing something, and they're scratching their heads forever, thinking, Why have you said that? We all have our quirks, right? We all have our little nuances. And then tell me, in terms of home treats, home comforts, what did you bring over with you, or what are you wishing you had more of here that we don't presently have here in Dublin?
I think Earl Grey tea. I've really struggled to find it.
Okay.
I love Earl Grey tea. Yeah, I went down to like Super Value thinking I was like, well, they don't have it in Lidl, but they'll have it in Super Value, and they didn't. So
Yeah.
I was, yeah, I've had to ask my friends.
Okay, that is an interesting one, and I'm sure you haven't gone into the dangerous territory of the tea debate with any Irish people too. And if you've yet to, I recommend against it because you will lose or win friends over it, and the room will be divided very quickly. So keep your tea opinion to yourself, Eve, is my best advice on that front. Very good. And moving on then, I guess have you changed as a person, both personally and professionally, since moving across here, since reclaiming a bit of life back in your work life balance?
Yeah, I think I'm a lot happier than I have been. I do miss my friends very much, but as you say, the flights are so cheap and everyone's very keen to come and see me all the time. So I do feel like I probably
Yeah,
see them more often than I used to in the first place. I think it's really nice to have such friendly people around you, like socially and professionally. And to be invited to things like the hurling match really meant a lot. So it's just I've been made to feel really welcome, and it's lovely to work in a job where I'm being paid really well to do something that I really love, and at the end of the day I can go for a swim, or I can go for a walk or a run, or go and have a pint of Guinness or something like that.
yeah, and it's very evident, Eve. We don't know each other that long, but it's very evident you're very passionate about the space that you're in, and very passionate about the work that you're doing, and that comes across very clearly here. And great to, like you say, be able to do that and have the time also to live and do the things you wish to do with your partner and your four-legged friends and your wider new community of friends here too. So if you were, I guess, if you were to give a bit of advice to anyone listening who's on the fence about moving, whether they're in the UK or they're across Europe or in South Africa or any part of the world, what one bit of advice would you give them?
Well, Match Medics were kind enough to put me in touch with a relocation company, so that made the move so much easier than it otherwise would have been.
Sure,
Getting like there's a bit of a housing crisis in Ireland, so actually finding somewhere to rent is difficult enough. I think, let alone, especially if you're not from an area, knowing where's nice and where's not nice is a bit of a challenge.
sure,
Internationally, it's almost impossible, isn't it? So having some
yeah,
like boots on the ground, as it were, some people who know, like you can explain to them, they're really helpful. They sort of gave us a form to fill out on what kind of things we wanted. So I was able to say that my husband needs to have a rugby club. That's a kind of a basic human need for him. And we'd
okay,
like to be by the sea, and we have dogs, so it would be good to be able to go for a walk easily and that sort of thing. So we were able to give them a kind of wish list of things that we'd like to be living near, and they came up with a wonderful, wonderful place that we've moved to. They helped us with all the paperwork that we needed to do, so, getting kind of the sort of the Irish version of your kind of national insurance number, getting
sure,
all that kind of stuff sorted, especially because my husband didn't have a job when we moved over. And so I think understand that sometimes getting the paperwork sorted could be a bit more complicated if you don't have employment, but
okay.
they had contacts, things like that. So they were able to sort all that kind of stuff out for us. And it was like money incredibly well spent. So I'd say definitely using a relocation company would be a wise thing to do if you can.
Brilliant. And we do have a relocation partner, as you referenced there, and we'll certainly include those details at the end of the podcast. Last question for before we let you back to your day, Eve. What's the best part about living in Ireland now for you and your husband and the four-legged friends?
Well, I mean, I live in such a lovely place. It's really remarkable to live right by a capital city and also be in a kind of rural setting. I can't think of many other places where you're going to be able to get that. So to be able to
Yeah.
walk 100 meters down the road to the beach and have seals and seabirds and things like that, and there are loads of really cool wild goats on the hill just up the way and stuff. So being
Okay.
able to like indulge both those interests of mine. So I love wildlife, but I also like nightlife. So being able to have both of those things is just been absolutely wonderful. So I've got to say, I think it's the best of both worlds that kind of living around Dublin really offers.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Eve. Thanks so much for coming on to the podcast today. And we'll talk to you again very soon.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
For listening to this week's episode. If you like what you heard today, please follow wherever you get your podcasts. Want to kickstart your relocation journey? Reach out to the team on our socials at Matchmates.